Man, it dang complicated, you know, man. It's like a dang old Rubik's Cube, man. You like talking about blue, red, man, then you get to one side and like messed up.
All right, Ouros, welcome to the Jay Burden Show.
Hello, my friend. I'm doing great. I'm glad to be back on.
Yeah, it's good to have you back on.
Yes.
So, you recently went to a conference for Christian localists. So before we get into that, because that's something I'm obviously interested in, could you just define very broadly what localism is?
Yes. Okay. So let's relate this back to Jacques Ellul, because I've been talking about him a lot, and I think he's a thinker a lot of people can learn from. Localism, in the way I see it, is essentially just what he called anarchism. And it really is, nowadays, especially because we live in this weird paradigm where you absolutely have to disengage from the increasingly unpredictable and unbelievable, geopolitical news and the increasingly easy to resent, domestic news and stuff that we see, drag queen story hour, etc. Localism is about engaging specifically with your community, or if you don't have one, getting out there. It's a broad explainer of realizing that in order to live a Christian life that brings the good, the true, and the beautiful to the real world, you have to have a decentralized system. You have to have something that basically has no dialogue with the system itself, the regime, other than to just render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and get whatever you need done, sign whatever paperwork so that you can keep doing your thing, and just, yeah, all right, cool, that's it. So it's not just engaging in local politics, but it's befriending people. It's learning perennial skills, and I would say nowadays it's also, I mean, I live in Texas. It also means networking with people across your state, and kind of building like an increasingly strong and trustworthy system where we can all kind of be together and not feel alone in this cold world.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I feel like if there's one broad claim, pretty much everyone who is not kind of in the like eternal, like, James Lindsay neoliberal sphere, is that pretty much everyone agrees that something isn't working, right? That something is wrong, and there's a million different things to blame for it. It's either, kind of this nebulous capitalism or, something else. But I think everyone could kind of agree that, whether it's bowling alone or anything else, that community has fundamentally fallen apart. And obviously there's a lot of like exogenous reasons for that. There are people who have made it specifically difficult to have a community, or made it easy to choose not to have a community. But all the same, it's like, well, okay, like, well, what's easier to do? Fix all of society, or integrate and kind of make your own community, And so the reason that I am somewhat hesitant on using labels for myself, because I'm still very much in the discovery stage. But the reason that I'm sympathetic to the term localist is just because it's like, well, okay, like I'm a 23-year-old. What am I going to do? Am I A, going to take over the world, or B, integrate and kind of create, the healthy community that I want, for myself and for my, for my friends and family?
I would say that here's the way that people need to start thinking on our side to maybe ingratiate themselves better with this worldview, is stop looking at the ominous elite as a specifically liberal paradigm, and something that has an actual cause that it's fighting for, something that it wants to construct. It does not. It is a machine that is trying to become as univocal, uniform, inoffensive, bland, and gray as possible, so that the system can maintain predictability to what it thinks is predictability. And in doing so, it has to destroy taboo. It has to destroy tradition, and it has to start making it. at least for the last 80 years. Now, this might be changing, and this might be a good thing for localism and people actually getting out in the real world and doing shit, and feeling a little less perturbed by, losing their job because, they say a no word or believe something against the system. The system itself has provided sustenance and predictability for the last 80 or so years, probably, more for America, and continues to, even now, as we're possibly going into a harsh winter for Europe. Over here, maybe it might get a little bad, but with America specifically, we have such freedom, we have such a system of loopholes that it won't be as bad, and world reserve currency and all that. But ultimately, what I think people need to start seeing things is you're dealing with technicians, you're dealing with technocrats, you're dealing with managers, and those people really just want to keep their jobs, and they don't really care about what they have to do that. Also, this is the producers and consumers. The consumer side, they're just going to do whatever they need so that they can keep consuming, and it's this feedback loop. And there's no way that that's ever going to change. And something to think about is, imagine if you became president or dictator of America. What would you do? You know what you would do? You would do something unpopular that 99% of people wouldn't like, even if it was just like ban weed or get rid of gay marriage, stuff like this. You'll ultimately have the system always against you because it's built to be convenient and efficient and made for land whales. It's not made for the guy who wants to work on a farm and build his big family and drink raw milk and not have to deal with the FDA and all this stuff. That society doesn't exist. So you know what you have to do. And I really, I hate to fucking bring up Evola, but you literally riding the tiger implies like, yeah, just the system is this way, and there's no way I'm going to affect it. That's going to be drastic. And even if I did, they would want to cut my head off because I'd be so unpopular. Yeah, closed circuit localism. That's it, mutant.
Well, I know what you mean, and I think to me there's something that's is easy to point out in previous generations, right? Which is, you've ever talked to someone who's, let's just say, like 50 plus, they talk about politics like you would talk about football if you were the quarterback. Like, here's what we need to do. Like, we just move this guy over here and move that guy over there. Yeah. And, fair enough. That's fun if you're sitting around, watching the Dallas Cowboys play. But it's obviously has no bearing on reality whatsoever. And so, look, I'm sympathetic to the idea that, like, okay, essentially we're creating some type of like vanguardist institution. Fair enough. Maybe we are. I maybe don't see it. I'm happy to stick around for the conversation because there's fun ideas being thrown around. Yeah. But at least for me, it does kind of seem like we have a limited supply of power. So fair enough. Maybe if we had more, things would be better. We could do more. I wish that we did, whoever we is. But in kind of the absence of that, it's like, well, what can we do with the resources we have? And to me, kind of building up the communities that will produce stronger, better men, that's probably the best long-term play we have.
Yes. I think people have to start thinking about what they want to prioritize and what they see themselves as. If you were to ask me, like, identify yourself, identify your political stance, I'd just say Christian no matter what. But if you wanted me to get autistic about it, I'd just say traditionalist. I feel like that's the best word. I don't think that would ever change. I don't want to change that. I think it makes sense because I do have show notes. I feel like that needs to be defined because what are we really after, if not for implementing in the world a beautiful sort of culture-bearing, anti-malaise world that really doesn't care about what the system has to say about it. And increasingly, if you're someone who subscribes to the idea that we're in, a system that has catabolic tendencies and seems to not be very competent, it kind of makes sense, to to realize, okay, I don't really want to have a part in this, and I don't know. There's almost a market for that because I mean, I'm kind of sick of seeing the the 10th Star Wars show in the 100th Marvel movie. I feel like people are ready, specifically, and I feel like this is the thing you have to identify as Christian traditionalists, Christian localists. Obviously, like at the event I went to with some of our guys, that event had a lot of, you'd probably call them NormieCon. I mean, they're probably a little bit better than NormieCon because they know a lot of these like homesteader types, like John Moody, who was there, and a lot of them, they like Doug Wilson. They like these like more positive, constructive guys who are not about giving the 75th argument about why transgenderism is stupid. They don't waste time doing that. They're more focused on okay, well, how do we move forward? And Doug Wilson has essentially taken over an entire town of like hipster Californians in Idaho and is slowly but surely turning it into the next sort of like Christian revival Calvinist movement. And it's like, where's the change? I mean, where else is good change really happening if not on the local level and in the church, specifically with Christians who have seen the fall of the church, have seen it either become mega churches, seen everything become whitewashed, and like a lot of people don't even know like what denomination they might even be in because their church is called like, I saw one called Home Church, like all this stuff. People want structure again, and that event was a prime example of it. But they weren't inflammatory. They weren't it didn't even occur to them that things need to be taken down or fought against. For them, it was, we need to establish communities and networks together where we can use technology to our advantage. I would like to throw out there, right now it's still just like a boomer website, but I think boomers are the most useful people for doing good, because it's called freesteading.com, and it's like a bunch of people who basically make groups around the idea of homesteading or in relation to homesteading, trading posts, all this stuff. And like, I made an account, I got like 10 friend requests from like innocent sweet boomers. And whenever I buy a house, which is, I mean, I'm under contract right now, I'm definitely going to engage in that because I have some stuff I want to do. So I specifically I want to do some beekeeping, but yeah, I think because let's think about it in the inverse. What are people doing? What are you going to benefit from in trying to try and stick in yourself in enemy territory, in places you don't belong? Because I tell you, man, everybody, I don't know too many people in government, but I know especially people in the military and in all these institutions that there's nothing that hasn't been touched by enemy ideology. One thing I would like to say, I interviewed Aaron Wrenn, and I really recommend his content in that interview. He spoke at that event, and he had like 6 principles, and my favorite one was, treat every American institution as captured and disengage from it, because it's not yours. It's never going to be yours. We live specifically in a paradigm of anti-Christianity. It's as simple as that. And if you want to move forward, you have to understand that. You have to understand that Trump was a good example of why you're not going to win. The best case scenario still didn't turn out good for anybody, because the system doesn't want rabble rousers on any side. They want conformity. They want uniformity. They want the totalitarianism, and totalitarianism not in a buzzword way, but in a way of the totalizing state. They need everything to be under one sort of efficient system, and you're just not going to be a part of that, because you want to use the hatchet to cut down the tree. You don't want to use a chainsaw. You want to actually get the real ergonic value of building a shed with your son, or working on an old Chevy Corvair. You don't want to just sit around and put a fucking VR headset on and pretend you're doing all that. That's where we're different, and that's where we understand, I think specifically Christian localists understand, a lot of them, because they have kids and families, they aren't even in their fucking heads thinking they're going to take over some system. They're going to be the ones to grow the seeds of culture. They're going to be the ones who, build homesteads and engage in these communities while everybody else is fluttering about thinking they're going to, take over the system.
It's interesting what you say, because it reminds me of my favorite Ted Kaczynski work. Is called The System's Greatest Trick. And if you want to listen to it, Skeptical Waves has a reading of it. It's not hard to find.
Nice.
But if you illiterate savages can't be bothered to read, someone will read it to you.
That's right.
But he essentially makes the point that the system kind of it knows that, and I don't think it knows in the sense that there's like Dr. Evil sitting at the top, twirling his mustache, but essentially like has evolved truly to essentially take into account like the natural human capacity for rebellion. And what it does is it essentially offers you kind of like a pre-made version of what rebellion is. So specifically in our case, every rebellion is kind of a mock version of the 1960s. So for instance, right, the transgender individuals are actually quite a good example. So what they're doing is, in their own mind, the most transgressive thing I could possibly do. I'm completely remaking myself. I am whatever I decide. I decide what I am, what my name is, what I look like, what gender I have. But in actuality, they've just tied themselves ever more deeply into the institution, right? They've essentially became a drug-dependent court eunuch for the regime. And so his point more broadly is essentially like, look, like every act of rebellion, short of just stepping away from it and kind of building your own thing, is kind of being, you're reinforcing the structure in and of itself. So you see this a lot, with the urge to be an internet racist. Because look, I'll be the first one to admit, memeing on the internet is kind of funny. You can say some stuff you can't say in real life. But if you've essentially become, a backwoods inbred neo-Nazi to own the libs, well, essentially what you've done is provided them a straw man that they can take a swing at whatever they want. You've provided them the enemy that they wanted. And so you've given them the moral victory almost by default. And so, well, to be honest, and might be an odd person to tie into this, what you kind of have to do is you have to take the Bowden approach, right? And just step over it. Like, don't engage, especially don't engage on their terms. And does that mean you just agree to whatever they say? No, it doesn't. But don't engage. Don't be what they want you to be.
Yeah, exactly. That's what Spencer did. So Minoan here, he brought up the machine. I think the way you were phrasing the whole, these people, they're literally they're almost like a customizable avatars, and that's almost the illusion of identity that they're given, which I don't even think Jacques Ellul could even imagine back in the 50s. But that's kind of that is the uniform system, because they don't have a true identity. They're deracinated from their culture, their sense of race, their sense of definitely religion. But Minoan brought up, I need to watch that Praise of Folly. I've been enjoying his videos. He it's funny because when I was reading Ellul, he like brought up Ellul in one of his streams, which is an interesting scene.
Yeah, I'll agree with you on that. I've missed some of them, but I've caught the vast majority of it. But Praise of Folly has just been knocking it out of the park recently.
I know, dude. He's I'm fucking smart, man.
His ability to do it day after day on completely different topics all by himself. Like, look, like I basically put out 3 hours of recorded content a week with other people. And if I listen back to him, like, didn't I say that 25 minutes ago? This guy can go on by himself for 6 hours with nothing and still produce new stuff.
I've really been liking his stuff about how the system has like given us the illusion of like labor independence, but really we're kind of back to where we were with working our asses off and not being given any we're essentially cogs in the system. He was almost like doing this interesting, not communist, but still like pro-labor monologue that was really, I haven't heard anyone do that, except I'll talk about that a lot, but not as publicly as I really want to. But that whole avatar idea, this you can customize your avatar. It reminds me of Ellul talking about the electronic brain that's going to run society, which he later on we call a computer. And yeah, that's essentially what the system functions as. So if you kind of take over that system, you're kind of functioning. I feel like this is what happened to Trump in a way. Is like you okay, now you're at the top. What do you do now? I mean, every dictator ends up having this issue. Is like, okay, I finally took out the fucking enemy, but now I have to realize, like, I have to do everything he just did, because that's how the system actually functions. Well, imagine being, doing that nowadays. Well, I mean, even then, imagine with the entire issue of a certain dictatorship in the mid 20th century. They had to adopt the same language of the West and be like, oh, actually the real democracy is fascism because it brings the people together, and it's like they it gives them a sense of nation, right? They had to adopt that technique. They had to adopt the same totalitarianism that the West had already kind of perfected, because democracy is really easy to use as an illusion, which ultimately we've been led in a direction where it's this perfectly efficient system. So looking at things from this perspective, you see this machine, and you see like a lot of these young guys too, a lot of these populists and whatnot. They have this hope that like they could kind of be their own they can like have a Calvin Coolidge future, or they can we just need one more Republican in the Oval Office and we'll be good. And it just doesn't really jive with the fact that America is the only thing that holds it together is the world reserve currency and the loose connection of economic zones that are tied together by increasingly shittier highways. So an important thing that I've been writing about like nonstop a lot. I guess I'll shill Sky Glow that I wrote over the course of a few weeks. The Ouros Manifesto, if you want to call it that. But I essentially went into I spent an entire chapter talking about limitation. We have to understand that we live in a world of limitation. We're not going to be we're not going to reach this nuclear futurist paradigm where everything's cheap and perfect and we're just going to go out into the stars. I feel like if you really are a traditionalist, you really believe like we have to act now in a productive Christian way to get something done. You can't be living in the Star Trek fantasy world still. And it takes recognizing not only, resource limitation, but kind of like, okay, well, where am I at? What can I do with my own resources? And how can I do that as fast as possible? And how can I use the system in my favor? Like if reparations come out, I'll use my 1/64th Mexican or whatever I am to get as much as I can. Because why wouldn't I? The system is essentially just an incoherent mess, and believing that it can be unified or turn into something that you want is it's gonna. You ever seen that movie? It's about the last Chinese emperor.
It's really good. The Last Samurai starring Tom Cruise?
I wish. No. It's
Sorry, that's probably incredibly racist, but no. The answer is no.
It is. I'm very offended. So in the story, I shouldn't even bring up the movie, but that's how I learned about this story. It's really good because it's essentially the last emperor of China. He was a kid, and then by the time he was getting older, while he was a kid in the Forbidden City that he couldn't leave, he was of the Qing dynasty, and immediately the entire empire was taken over by the Republic of China, the new Republicans, and he was like basically put on house arrest in the Forbidden City. And by the time World War II came around, he was living in this fantasy world where he wanted to restore Manchuria, and Japan came to him and said, hey, we'll give you Manchuria and you can be your own emperor of Manchuria. Like, we're talking about the last emperor of China. And he was so freaked out. He was so about saving his people, and that he became just another puppet. But in his own world, he's like, I'm going to restore China, but really, by the end of his life, he was a guy who could barely like put on his own fucking shoes and had to be taken care of because he was like, he had no skills. He was an impoverished dude, just I think living like in the streets. People said he was very nice, though. But essentially, that's kind of where a lot of people on the right are at in envisioning a better future. They don't really understand that, no, you're not living in a cultural paradigm that's specifically liberal, that specifically has an ideology that it's aimed at. It has nothing. It's telos. Jacques Ellul literally ended Technological Society by just saying, dude, these people, like, they don't... It's science for science, efficiency for efficiency. They'll make up something in their own head. I mean, if you talk to an atheist, I was an atheist, I know how those guys think. It's essentially their morality ends at consent. And that's kind of the world you live in, is a bunch of people who the only sense of right and wrong they have is, oh, well, did the person consent to that? Like, they don't, that's as far as things go. It's a very primitive mindset. So, you know, you're kind of in a world of like free roaming, like man in a state of nature, essentially. And you're essentially like an adventurer trying to, you know, turn the land into something that's you know, useful to you. And you just kind of, as you said, have to step over everything. Yeah.
Well, to me, it reminds me very much of that Guénon phrase, the reign of quantity. You know, and it very much is the morality of line go up.
Yes.
And to me, and the guys over at Longhouse, you know, Walrus and Luddic Path, did a series of really great streams on the New Atheists. And specifically, they did a great stream, which I've actually listened to several times. Might be slightly embarrassing to admit, and they're basically talking about, you know, the selfish gene and how so much of what we take to be, and this is actually, as much as I hate to say it, again, James Lindsley BTFO'd, where our conception of, you know, like science and quantity as kind of this like completely impartial arbiters, completely backwards and broken, right? Like a lot of the things that we consider to be good, you know, for instance, like quantity go up, you know, I can buy more things for less money. Like that's essentially an ideological presupposition, you know, and the idea that like, well, it's objective because the number got bigger, therefore we must do the thing to make the number get bigger, is presented very much as kind of like cold baseline level. Well, that's just what the science says. And to me, it's so frustrating to see people who have lived through, and I'll be careful how I phrase this for the sake of my newly monetized channel, who went through 2020 and saw how the science, capital S, was treated, and yet still kind of like fall prey to these like core baseline like faults of rationalism of like, oh, well, the science said something. And to me, it's like, well, okay, that's a stupid argument before, and it's especially stupid given, you know, what we've seen it can be used to justify.
Yes, this is the thing. It's a mythos. It's a myth. It's weird that we've really reached peak science. We've reached like basically we've reached the sort of testing zone time. I don't know what you'd call this. It's sort of era where science has become the mythological, sort of the mythology of the modern man, historical science specifically, where it's, you know, just this giant guessing game about history. And yeah, it's I don't know where he's going with that, but that's essentially, that's actually, yeah. So this is another thing. Line go up is actually something very interesting, because you have cigar chewer fat cats, which those guys don't even really exist anymore. But those guys, and then like environmentalists who believe in wind turbines and all this, they essentially still have the same telos of the ascending ray of progress, both of them. It's a specific type of modernist mindset that we have to break out of, which is why I would recommend Chad Haig. He calls it the hermeneutical decline, because there's no interpretation of meaning anymore. All it is more, big number. And it's like, that's yet another issue of modernity is playing into that mindset. And once you start messing with politics, it's the same dynamite as thinking that we need nuclear energy or all these things, having an opinion about this stuff that ultimately you're kind of playing into the same mindset of progress. And I in my opinion, Like, that's not what we're about. Like, I think if there's one thing that we can all agree on, even like the fucking atheists and all the pagans and perennialists and all we can agree on is like progress is not good, and we need to kind of like slow shit down, probably have a little bit of a dark age, so that we can rally people and figure out what is beauty and rediscover what beauty is and what truth is. And that requires kind of forcing yourself out of your comfort zone into the dirty world. And I would say one of the best skills people could develop right now is being bored. I think a lot of us have forgot how to be bored. But yes, that's once you start thinking about you said with the whole rationalism thing, once you start kind of thinking in that mindset, in that soma, as Chad Haig calls it, is you're noticing that you're still kind of connected to that fake world, and I feel like you almost need to train your mind to realize all the stuff that I'm dealing with right now is very ephemeral, and it's probably not going to last very long, and I need to start getting myself used to the idea that unpredictability is going to be the norm. Degeneracy is going to continue to be the norm. Cults are going to become the norm. And I think there's a certain sort of anti-materialist mindset you have to develop and completely disengage from all of that, which is why politics, to take from our Prophet Kaczynski, Confessor Kaczynski, politics is a surrogate activity. Ultimately, it's just a way of distracting you from the fact that you're not free, as he would say, and I would agree with that. And freedom is just a word for nothing left to lose, as Chris Christopherson said, and that's essentially freedom is essentially like not being tied down to anything, and I feel like we need to regain a sense of purpose to the point that we don't desire freedom anymore. But I feel like right now we're in a state of we need freedom, we need an escape from everything.
Well, I feel like that comes down to the modern versus the classical version of freedom, right? So you have the kind of like the liberal conception of freedom, which is like freedom is the ability to consume as much as I want of whatever I want. It's unlimited consumer choice. Like I can do whatever I want, versus, kind of a more classical conception in which freedom to a certain extent is being like a good and virtuous man, right? Like having control of yourself. So this is the, kind of like the deep conception of freedom that we hear in the Bible, right? Like in order to be free, you have to be a slave, which to a certain extent sounds paradoxical, but it's completely true. Because on one hand, right, like by virtue of the fact that I'm training for a half marathon, I am no longer free to eat a box full of Twinkies. So to a certain extent, I've given something up. I have given up a freedom. But on the other hand, it's like, well, okay, what freedom do I gain from that? Well, one, I gain, like a certain degree of self-mastery. I can make myself do things I could no longer do before, both in the sense that I can run farther, but also like, well, okay, I can actually do difficult things, not just like an eternal like race to the bottom. And so
yes,
to me, it's almost like, and I also don't think that these are decisions that will be that will have to be made for the vast majority of people, because I think that there's a certain amount of like virtue that's almost becomes a necessity in like under privation, right? Like, and I don't mean to go all social Darwinist here, but if you're a fat, lazy slob who can't do anything and is horribly unhealthy, and needs to be on a constant drip of chemicals in order to function.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not in an incredibly complicated society that has, a group of men essentially paid to provide all of those things for you, you don't make it, And so to me, I think a certain amount of this, the reason that we've lost these virtues that we've kind of essentially like run to, these kind of like easy, weaker freedoms, a lot of it, I think, is just, it's like a preference cascade. You're able to do it. And so like, and I was talking to Prude about this the other day, where it's like, we're kind of in this horrible position of, for the first time ever, having to make active choices that were just kind of defaults for our ancestors. So for instance, right, and I don't mean to go on this forever, but
this is a good point.
And I say this as, a Protestant, right? But the idea that birth control wasn't like a question you had to answer for yourself, like, do we use birth control? Yes or no? Like, is that something that is wrong? Like, that's a very recent discussion, like 70 years, maybe, at a consumer level. Let's just say 100 for round numbers. Like that was something that your great grandparents 200 years ago, they didn't even have to consider it because it wasn't on the table. And so a lot of, I think that like the moral backsliding that we've seen is just that, like, it's much like what people always say about dieting. Like, what's the best way to diet? Well, don't buy unhealthy food. Like, don't rely on your will, because look, like the will is corrupted. And I hope at least that when we see kind of a regression to a less complicated state, that a lot of the things that we've lost, the kind of the social fabric, will kind of return out of necessity.
Just to bring up the whole, Ecclesiastes, and then I knew Mutant was going to bring it up. The Hegel's master-slave sort of idea of freedom, because the idea is that the slave isn't, he's enslaved, he has no freedom, and the master, he has all this power, but essentially the master is the one who's enslaved, and the slave is free, not in charge, not a master, but he's free, because the slave doesn't have to worry about anything, and he simply works to do what his master tells him to, and this is a virtue. This is something that in the Bible is seen as like, most people throughout history would have been in some service position where they would be, essentially ostracized from society as mountain men or dead without that position. And in enslavement, there is freedom, and that's a very Christian mentality. And it's funny because pagans will be like, Christians have a slave mentality, and it's like, yeah, I do. I think that's a good thing. I want to be enslaved to good, virtuous things and not have to deal with the horrible issue of micromanaging peasants. But that being said, I think that actually plays into localism itself, because you're basically outsourcing, like, okay, we can have a guy here to make it hard for Californians to move in this area, and we can like organize government to essentially like gatekeep people, which, another thing I talk about. I've had to deal with that when I was a hippie, but the entire I at least I didn't have to I didn't deal with that, but I witnessed the way hippie communes don't gatekeep and how it ruined their entire communes. These things, they can be figured out. But the issue comes down to is what are you going to restore your system with when you have completely steamrolled over another system? I feel like leftists, they just have to live in a world of they're happy to rely on the machine and they'll go down with it. But for right wingers, I feel like there's a sense of humility that we have to understand, because there's no longer any aristocrats anymore. And if you are to be an aristocrat, you have to kind of become landed gentry, the kulak, and that takes. Have you seen that what was that pagan movie that came out recently? The Norse movie, The Norseman.
No, I have not.
It was a really good movie. There's some interesting. It was, as a film, it was very good. There are issues with it, but there's a part of the film where, there's like a lord over this area in Iceland, and he was telling his son, you got to work harder than the slaves, because you got to show them that you're right there with them, and all. It doesn't just build morale, but it shows that you aren't bullshitting. It shows that you really are, in charge. This is a mindset that, in a way, things are bottom up, because it requires a lot of elbow grease and recognizing your lot. And what are you going to use that? How are you going to use your lot to engage with the real world that isn't just endless ruminating on academia and politics and I see this from both the elite theorists and the populists is that issue of rumination and not kind of recognizing that, like, we're all like I'm an HVAC guy, right? If you're an aristocrat, I shouldn't be talking to you, but that's where we're at, you know. Like we're all in the same sort of situation here. It's like starting a small business. You don't really assess like I'm better than you because I have a business degree. It's like, nah, we're in a situation where you kind of have to find your lot and how are you going to use it to actively change the world around you. And you know, one small way is how are you going to gatekeep your area? You know, how are you going to raise property taxes so Californians don't move in? You know, how are you or how are you going to you know, make it look like crime is you know, out of whack so that, you know, they don't move there? Or, you know, what signs can you put up in your city or your town so that Californians don't want to move there? Like,
I believe a Turkish man named Vlad actually solved this problem. How to keep people out.
Yo, you mean a Romanian man?
Oh, sorry. That's gonna make the two Romanians who listen to this really mad, isn't it?
Well, he's rolling in his grave right now.
I promise, whoever I offended, I meant to offend you. Anyway, no, but in all seriousness, it is something to be said that, like, and you see this, right, that the eternal shitlib is really afraid of two things, and it's stigma and gatekeeping. You know, and you'll see these terms trotted out as like ultimate evils, right? That everything must be for all people, you know, that no one can ever be told no. And I feel like to a certain extent, a synonym for localist is particularist, right? Like there are a particular place for particular people. So for instance, right, like, look, like, you know, you're a Texan, right? There's certain things that come with that. You know, there's certain cultural markers. And you see this. Yes. So Vingle, who's a great friend of mine, has a great YouTube channel. I cannot recommend it enough.
Yeah, it's awesome.
He's been posting clips from a documentary about Cajuns. So it's about specifically follows one guy who makes accordions in the middle of nowhere, Louisiana. And there's this great clip. And if I could show it without, you know, causing problems, I probably would. But the guy is essentially talking about like why he does what he does. And he's like, look, like, I love my home. I love where I am. You know, it's special. It's unique to me. There are things that I can do here that I can't do anywhere else. I'm connected. And without, you know, coming off like a cringy wignat, like there is both a blood component to where you're from, right? Like it's important that my ancestors are buried near here. It's important that, you know, like the farm that I work on, there's a family cemetery there. But there's also something like a soil component, you know, like it is a place, you know. And I think that if I had to really like level a complaint at, you know, American culture, and look, like I've named myself on the internet after a character who just drives and drives and drives. Look, I love the open road. It's kind of, you know, endemic to us Amerimuts, but
that is true.
I think that if we're going to essentially reconnect with kind of the chain of being, you know, connect ourselves to kind of like the things that we've left behind, like that has to come with a particular somewhere. And it's never going to be perfect. You know, like this eternal idea of like, oh, the next city over is going to be better, you know, or this town where there's this cool scene or these cool shops or this cool neighborhood. If I just move there, it'll all be perfect. Like there's a certain extent to which you just have to, well, I mean, kind of pick up your cross and walk.
Yes. You have to have skin in the game. The nomad mindset is man in a state of nature, as Thomas Hobbes would say. It truly is, because you don't have a sense of belonging. You're always kind of, because I know what this feeling is like. And I think a lot of my ancestors do, because they never really stuck around in an area. But and that's what I want to change, which is why I'm going to stay in Texas. And there's this so skin in the game. Let's talk about that. So I am currently under contract on a house, and through that event, County Before Country, I actually met some Texans, and there's a couple who are in the area I'm moving to, and I already know somebody down there who also has the same intention of growing their life down there with the family. You know, a lot of their family is, you know, owns several acres and ranches out in this area of Texas, and I have, luckily through basket weavers, created a lot of connections with people in like the three major sort of metroplexes of Texas: Houston, DFW, and Austin and San Antonio. And there's this sense of, okay, I mean, a mortgage is definitely a way to get skin in the game. It's like, okay, now I'm here, and I can't sell this house for another 3 years, or else I get a huge hit on my capital gains taxes. So I basically can't move here for 3 years. And then there's the situation of, I'm specifically buying several acres, and I want to have my own sort of infrastructure. I want to build. I want an example is beekeeping. An example that I don't really think where I'm moving there's too many meaderies or beekeepers. So there's that situation of, okay, can I sell this honey, this excess honey that I make? Who can I hire to come help me? And my friend who lives around there, he's basically like a permaculture guy, and I'd really like to see him use those skills to his advantage. And so, okay, now I'm basically ingratiating myself with not only a very specific culture in Texas, like probably it's Tejano culture, the most, present culture in Texas, I would say, other than Far East Texas culture. That's just, Dixie. The only part of Texas that I would actually call like full-fledged Dixie. And the rest of Texas is just kind of like still young and not really cultural. Like where I'm at right now, it's basically just German culture, which I don't like. But where I'm moving, it's like, you have to like it, or you have to know how to adapt. I speak intermediate Spanish, but I'll really have to like test it out. But I'm generally more of an open-minded person, and I enjoy having to adapt and deal with different kinds of people, cultures specifically. So that's my own experience of, I'm actively trying to get skin in the game because I don't have it elsewhere. And when you start to do that, in my experience, doors will just start opening left and right. Like I'll have some neighbors. I already saw them. They were like some Mexicans about a quarter mile away, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to go befriend those people. Like if I move here, I'm gonna do it, and they're not gonna expect it, dude. It's gonna be weird, but I'm gonna make it happen because if you're not, you're just kind of like living in either you're effectively a digital nomad where you're just kind of like, you don't have a home, or you're, in my case, I'm just stuck in purgatory. In most people's cases, though, I would say there's some semblance of roots, and depending on where you're from, especially if you're in a city, those roots, like if you're especially an old school like East Coast city, you can really use those roots to your advantage, because there's already like in Aaron Wren's case in I think Indianapolis, there's already sort of cultures of conservatives within those cities. I have a friend from the event, really good guy, in an undisclosed city. He's started a book club, and there's like he's gatekeeped out the liberals, and now he has like his own little book club of like interesting people. And it's like, okay, this is like, I wouldn't even expect him to do something like that. I don't even know. I'd have to try to do that. But this is the way you kind of you get skin in the game and find yourself you kind of find yourself growing attached to your area. And I feel like for me, I could do that anywhere, but so I'm picking where I'm already at because I have a little bit of family and I just want to keep close to them. And I love Texas, but yeah, it's a question of, do you have skin in the game, and do you know how to do that? And the easiest way, if you aren't, is just to go to church. Find a good church, and it's hard these days. I don't know who brought it up, but essentially, yeah, there's this good interview that Aaron Wrenn did with another guy called "Why Men Hate Going to Church." He wrote a book called that, and essentially, churches that have a lot of women are generally a lot more soft, and churches that are able to attract a lot of young men are generally the churches that will last a lot longer, because those men actually want to go. They want to start the family. They want to have a well-adjusted, moral Christian life, and that's what you got to look for.
That's a good metric. I hadn't thought of that before, but that's something I would look for. I would also and these are related concepts to what we've been talking, but in looking for a place of worship, make sure that there are both young men and old men and children in a church, because especially in college towns, it's easy enough to find churches with a ton of young people. But if the only person who isn't 23 is the pastor, things not only tend to get a little weird and creepy, like what 40-year-old dude wants to hang out with like 123-year-olds, but also like you lose so much of that kind of like intergenerational like development that has kind of been just like chipped away from normal interactions. And so it is to a certain degree hard. Like, I'm not going to say this is easy. Like, to a certain degree, I feel very, very lucky that I am in an area that has a strong community.
You're in a perfect area, dude. You're in like one of the best states in the union, dude. The more I've traveled across the East Coast and in older 13 colony states, I'm amazed at how just beautiful and established and old it is, because Texas, it feels like a state that came about in the 60s. Nothing here has culture.
That's fair. And maybe
it's only Tejanos and like Far East Texas.
But Far East Texas, that like driving from the Gulf Coast to Austin, that drive, like that speaks to a part of me that's like, go out, get a horse, just do something.
Yeah, dude. No, Texas is like the first state where you start to realize like this place is untamed, and there's a lot of it that is just undiscovered, and it needs to be given life. And white liberals are not doing it any justice.
There's something to be said for living in a place where you could very easily wander off and die and no one would ever find you.
Like 411. Yeah, dude. No, dude. Yes, definitely Skinwalker territory out west, and even out here, because I go hiking a lot, and anytime it's nighttime, it's like you're gonna hear some. I've heard like I don't want to talk about cryptids, but I've had some really weird experiences, dude. I won't get on that. We'll save that for another stream.
Yeah, we will. we got into a conversation about the supernatural in your Discord a while back.
Yes, we did. Yes,
it was kind of a fun conversation. This might go back to my staunch anti-rationalism of what's your argument for ghosts and demons and all that? I believe in them. Like
yeah, exactly. Here you go. Boom. This is a good book. Though I would say there is a point to be made that all apparitions are demons just pretending to be, like ghosts, for instance. Ghosts are an interesting question. But that is the point of anti-rationalism that I find myself a part of. And I think the best point to make that is against this horrible philosophic materialist mindset is, hey, out of nowhere, the scientists who hated God just started saying that monsters don't exist. And that's all bullshit. Even though throughout all of history, our ancestors survived on folklore, and it was like food. It's what taught them. It was the real world to them. And we're just going to kill all that. And your real world is the highways and the pods and hot Cheetos. And it's just like I would rather. It's not even like just I would rather live in a world with more life, but I feel like that's the real world. You can't see heaven, you can't see hell, but it's a lot more real than the shit that we see every day with this bizarre purgatory realm we live in right now.
Well, look, as Sam Harris has said, we have telescopes and we haven't seen heaven yet. So how can heaven exist?
Thomas Hobbes would find. I mean, he's almost like it's a very Thomas Hobbes point of view, thinking that heaven's just this materialistic realm that you can find. But yeah, that's everyone needs to go watch the Ken Ham versus Bill Nye debate. That's gonna blow you away, especially if you were like me and were an atheist when you first saw it, and you watch it now, you're like, Bill Nye is just name a bunch of facts that somehow exist, and then Ken Ham is like basically saying, well, sure, fine, whatever you want, but most of this is just like literal speculation. Like all of science, historical science, is mythology. So you start it's yeah, go ahead.
My big complaint with the like, wow, heckin' science, so amazing, is that a bunch of it's quite theoretical. And look, I maybe if I had, an IQ high enough and enough training to get into it, I would agree. But to a certain extent, it has literally just as much bearing from my perspective as angels on the head of a pin. It is literally, I have no way to conceptualize both. And so the idea that some bored intern is sitting at his desk at NASA and he's like, hey, we found a planet where it rains gasoline sideways, it's made out of diamonds, and it smells like piss. It's like play, but you know what I mean? Like just like throwing Mad Libs words together.
It is. It's a game of Mad Libs. Ivan Illich talked about how this was what really blew my mind when I read Medical Nemesis, is essentially scientists and doctors play the role of the shaman and the priest in modern times. They act as the arbiter of knowledge, of forbidden knowledge that you must unlock from them. And the interesting, a shaman will tell you riddles and tales and talk about, what if he's a priest, it's what, he's told to via the word of God or from divine intervention or some kind of engagement with an angel. And if he's a shaman, he's just communing with demons and whatnot. But still, I like Ivan Illich's point of view, where he kind of he's a literal Catholic priest, but he was kind of taking the point of view of the shaman and the priest as like an equal class, providing the same ends, the same means to an ends. And the scientists and the doctor do not provide this at all. And it's every aspect. A lot of the microscopic issues of modernity can be reflected in just the macroscopic issue of the myth of progress. And everything being just shifting sands, everything changes a little bit. A certain kind of medicine that was released in the last couple of years is a prime example of it. The facts change, and you're just kind of there to bear the brunt of it. Especially if it gives you that old M carditis, and
so it's actually you're hammering a point. So one of my favorite books I've read recently is the Forest Passage by Ernst Jünger, and he actually makes a very similar point about medicine, where he's like, look, like it, and he even says like, look, like there's a little bit of a priest in every good doctor and a little bit of a doctor in every priest, but he said we've essentially swapped one for the other, and instead of holy water, it's and look, don't get me wrong, like obviously medicine functions to a certain degree, like we have decreased mortality from sanitation, and kind of like the products of germ theory. I'm not denying that. But his point is essentially like we have, in doing that, in replacing the physician for the priest, and this is very, very relevant to a certain medication, where health has become our salvation.
Exactly. Iatric, he calls it iatrogenesis. That's exactly what Ivan Illich called it, is that's where the foundation of salvation comes from. Yeah.
So I'm curious, is that his real name? Because The Death of Ivan Illich.
That is
also about a man obsessed with doctors, which is just an odd.
That is fucking crazy.
Short story.
That
which is a
wild.
great one. Not quite obsessed with doctors. It's about a man dying.
That's Dostoevsky, right?
Oh, you're right. It is Dostoevsky. That's my second major error of the night that will make Slavs angry at me.
Yeah. No, I feel like this is where I just get so concerned with anybody engaging with the machinations of modernity in the industrial society. Is okay. You'll pick and choose what you hate about it, what you want to destroy, but at the same time, you'll go to the dentist, and it's like I'm not saying don't go to the dentist, but here's the thing: is okay, that's fair. It's your show, but you're swapping. You're essentially they're doing something that you can do yourself. Also, as Jolly Heretic mentions, there wasn't any tooth decay until Europeans started eating sugar, and then they started losing their teeth and dying. So it's like there are these things that throughout all of history we've been able to live full lives, and yet within the mythos of modernity, we have completely forgotten what people used to actually be like in their element. And a good example that both Ivan Illich, Jacques Ellul, all these kind of like anti or skeptical of technology people will talk about is in history, they'll always say that, in history you had horrible working conditions, you'd work 15 hours a day, and nowadays you have your great 7-8 hour workday, and you get all these benefits. And yet back in the old days, you'd essentially be you'd be your own boss, managing your own thing, and throughout the day you'd go at your own pace. There was no idea of getting numbers done on time. What we think of economic stagnation as, throughout the entirety of history, they would think of economic stagnation as economic stability. And throughout history, you would, as once again going back to the sort of master slave Hegelian stuff, Hegelian dialectic, is as the slave to, in that, what I would kind of call in a way the perfect system, which was pre-Enlightenment Christian Europe, this was not an issue. You would work your 15-hour day, but it would be full of cracking jokes with passersby, taking a break, just chilling, because there was no one whipping you, saying keep moving, keep. Nowadays everything is about micromanagement. And back in the old days, there was this sense of sort of, you had your own place in the spirit, in sort of in a spiritual sense. And nowadays you have a place as a hamster running on a treadmill. You have your own place as this you're inseparable from some specialized job within the system. And I feel like if you are seeking to break out of that, it requires completely changing the way you view the paradigm, not as something that's liberal or something that is because of I don't because of one aspect of the evil system, right? You could say, it's because of atheism, or you could say it's because of feminism or something, but it's like you're not really hitting at the core of it, which is, we live in a society obviously it goes back to God. Ultimately it goes back to godlessness, but it's the teleological drive that is the ultimate issue. That back throughout all of history, it was God, it was family, it was sort of we were one with kind of our community, and now we're these deracinated individual cogs. And you kind of have to realize this is a technological and teleological issue. It's not something that's governmental or political, and it's the system itself is just a Frankenstein's monster. It's not something that you should look at and be like, oh, this is something that we can actually change for the better, because that's just falling into the same issue. It's really just like it's a bit like an AI going out of control. Yeah. So I guess to sum that up, in my opinion, I think people need to rethink the way they look at technology and at grander, bigger projects, because we've completely lost the soul of society. We've completely lost our own position in as a worker bee, and our own contribution to things. I think a lot of people forget what it's even like to be yelled at, what it's like to actually just have to, humiliate yourself, and do the nasty shit. People forget, like, most thatched houses in England back in the fucking 1100s were mostly made up of dirt and shit. Like, that's what your ancestors built their houses out of. And now, people barely really want to engage with the dirty world around them. I don't know. You'll find a lot more value in shit than trying to take advantage or try and take over this political paradigm. People need to stop thinking so big. The big things are really what drives you to think that you're God.
Well, that's a good way to wrap things up. Do you have anything to get out of the way before you want to?
Yeah,
before you want to get your plugs out?
I would say check out my Substack if you're curious about. I would, there's a lot of people that I would recommend, like Chad Haig and all that. He's on YouTube. Jacques Ellul and all these people that I've spoken about. But subscribe to me on Substack and in YouTube, and hopefully this house goes okay. And I'm buying a 60-year-old house, so
Yeah, good luck, man.
a couple issues with insurance and all that. But if I get that out of the way, there's going to be a lot more interesting, engaging, and wholesome content that everyone should look forward to. So thank you again, Jack. I love coming on and I love talking to you, man.
Yeah, glad to hear it. We have
Yes,
one
sir.
super chat, the first ever super chat from Minoan. Money for the expedition. No idea what expedition you're talking about, but the money will be used for that. Congratulations on the channel growth. Yeah, thanks. Obviously, you guys are, a big part of that. I've been pretty happy to see things grow, but this is a hobby for me, and it's somewhat gratifying to see results.
Oh yeah.
And anyway, guys, my links are down in the description, as are Ouros's, and I've included a video to a Skeptical Waves video.
Nice.
Both the one that I mentioned earlier by Kaczynski, The System's Greatest Trick, and also Ernst Van Zyl, Conscious Caracal, on why you shouldn't ever leave your home. So watch both of those as a required viewing. If you don't watch them, I
love Ernst.
Crawl under your walls and beat you up. And remember, guys, the lie can't last forever. Good night.